Hi, my name is Chester Elton. Together with my co-author, Adrian Gostek, we've been writing on culture for the last 22 years. We've written books like All In, Leading with Gratitude, and Anxiety at Work. And that's why I am so excited to have some time to question and interview and learn from the indomitable Delise Simmons. She is the Chief Culture Officer at the Culture Think Tank. So thank you so much for your time, Delise. This is going to be more fun than humans should be allowed.
Thank you, Chester. I don't know about indomitable, but I'll do my best to be indomitable. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you.
You bet. Now, give us a little 30 seconds on your work before you came to the Culture Think Tank, because you've done some remarkable things in culture for Southwest Airlines and so on, which I think gives you more credibility than almost anybody in this space.
Well, thank you. I've had the great good fortune to go work for Southwest Airlines in the late 1980s. I was given a little bit more responsibility than my experience would suggest, as I worked for Herb Kelleher and Ann Rhodes, and they were just very good at delegating a lot of responsibility and accountability to people who were eager and willing to do it. So I had the chance to help develop and lead the Southwest Airlines University for People, which was the leadership university that we created in the late 1980s. And I ran that department for the better part of 10 years, where we trained about 1,000 leaders every month, and had the opportunity after that time to go start a startup airline. And I left Southwest Airlines in 1997 and helped create JetBlue Airways, which we launched out of JFK in 1999. And it was the largest mega startup airline in commercial aviation history. So I got the chance to work in a culture at Southwest Airlines that was palpable and studied, and kind of the industry darling, and then move on to starting an airline where you scratch your head and say, what do we want this culture to look like? And we built it with intention, and JetBlue Airways has a fantastic culture today. So we're very excited about the chance that we got to do that.
Yeah, when you think about great culture brands, I mean, those are two that really pop up, certainly in the aviation industry. So that background gives you all the credibility to talk about. So how do you measure a great culture? As Adrian and I have been writing, I mean, you've got engagement surveys and you've got pulse surveys, and then it was kind of a lot of art, not a lot of science. Are people smiling? Do they feel good? And so now your work with the Culture Think Tank, you've actually figured out a way to give some really simple and accurate matrix around what is a healthy culture. So why don't you talk to us about the Culture Think Tank and your role there, and why tools like this are so important?
I appreciate it. It's so exciting. The work that we're doing right now just has me lit up every day. I'm so excited about it because the work that I had done from the late 1990s until about 2015 was wonderful, but frustrated me because it was largely anecdotal. Right. I would be asked if we could come in and do some work, and generally the CFO would look at me and say, well, how do I know this is going to work? Kind of prove it. And the only way that we could prove it was with anecdotes, to look at the clients behind us, see what they've done, the work that we've done within that structure. And that was the only thing we had. So we partnered up with some people that were doing data research around leadership and culture. And they've been capturing data since 2005 around what are the leadership behaviors that move the needle on culture the fastest. So we took our technology with their technology, and we created the Culture Think Tank. And the Culture Think Tank is a research organization which studies what are the leadership behaviors that move the needle on culture and move the needle on employee well-being. And with the work of you and Adrian, one of the things that we realized was that anxiety has been plaguing our employees for a long time, and even more so during the pandemic. So we isolated anxiety to see, is anxiety influencing your organization negatively, and how can we help impact that? So by understanding the well-being of our employees, by understanding the anxiety level, then we can give you a culture score, a well-being score, and an anxiety rating. And then the neat thing about our tool is so many of these assessment tools, they give you data, they assess the information, but then there's nothing else, there's no action plan. So our tool also gives you an action plan that says, leaders, if you'll focus on these 5 behaviors this month, that will move your needle on culture and move the needle on well-being the fastest.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You got to my next question was, so often you hire these consultants and you come in and you get all this great data and they give it to you, and then they kind of go, and good luck with that. Have at
worse,
it.
Yeah, and even worse than that,
Get creative. Yeah.
Yeah, we were guilty of it before too. We have an assessment. We have the big 52 question culture assessment. It's a great tool, but it provides you a lot of feedback. But we were doing it twice a year, so beginning of the year and the end of the year. And what we've learned, especially through COVID, is that if you're asking employees how they're feeling and what they're experiencing in January, and then you're working on that data in May, what they're experiencing in May has probably little to do with what they said in January. So by shortening that assessment, we ask between 5 and 7 questions depending on your organization. It takes 5 minutes for your employees to fill out the assessment, and then it gives your leaders the 5 behaviors that they need to be focusing on that month in order to improve culture and well-being. It just makes the tool real time, live, and focusing on what the employees are dealing with that moment rather than what they were thinking 4 months prior.
Yeah, and it is interesting, right? You surveyed your people in February of 2020 and things were going great. And then you survey again in October of 2020. Well, there's been a whole universal, global shift, and you're already so far deep into it. Talk to me a little bit about how did you get that 56 question, these engagement surveys, 80 question surveys down to 5 questions. And what do you say to the skeptics that say, look, you need more than 5 questions, you need more than 5 minutes?
It's a good question. And the data is tied to several key components of what influences culture. So our tool is devised around the understanding that communication, trust, alignment, and accountability are the 4 influencers of culture. And so all of the questions that we ask tie back to those 4 key components. So if we are improving communication and trust, then we can get accountability and alignment within our organization. So whether we ask 100 questions or we ask 10, as long as we map them back to those 4 key understandings of what influences culture, then that's how we are able to get a lot of data with very few questions.
That is so cool. So again, you talk about, you've got this dashboard, you've got this roadmap, it's a culture score, it's a well-being score, and then the anxiety score. As I was talking to Will Lindstrom, your mega data guy, who if we wanted to go deep, we'd call Will. He said one of the things that was really interesting is that if you really want to have a dramatic shift on well-being and culture, you actually start with anxiety, which is really interesting because I know you've used a lot of the work that we do on anxiety. My guess would have been you work on the culture scores first and then well-being and anxiety. And it was actually the opposite. Did that surprise you?
It did. And we're seeing different sectors of the marketplace having anxiety that's truly plaguing their performance. And then other sectors, there really are not, anxiety is not an issue for them. So I think the best information that we're getting is understanding which organizations and which industry sectors are experiencing anxiety differently than others, and how do we learn from those that aren't. Certainly our healthcare employees in our healthcare clients are experiencing high levels of anxiety. Those frontline level workers, people who have had to be essential during the pandemic, their anxiety has been higher than average, higher than what we've seen. But the good news is we're trending now since the pandemic began, and we've tracked it since March of 2020. Anxiety is actually, with our clients, is on the decrease. And we think it has to do with the fact that they're asking their employees how they're feeling, they're learning from their employees, and then they're doing something about it. So anxiety, as you know, with your experience and research, can be mitigated, and we don't do away with it. We don't eradicate it completely. And I think you would agree, sometimes a little anxiety is maybe good. Our high performers say that they do experience some level of anxiety, but it's when it becomes chronic and long-term, as your research would suggest, that it becomes debilitating individually and organizationally.
Yeah. That's another great thing I like about where you go is the tool is flexible. To your point, there are some cultures where anxiety is really high, and understandably so. Others where it's more of a well-being, it's more of a cultural fit. Okay, so great. So we've got this overview, your wonderful background, the tool, how you do it. 5, 6 questions, you can do it often. You can get those roadmaps. So give me some success stories. If you can share the names of your companies and stuff, or if you have to change the names to protect the innocent, we understand. Talk to us about how some of your clients have used it to the benefit, not only of their culture and their customers, more importantly, for the well-being and the health of their employees.
That's great. We have a client who's been a long-term client of ours, about 2.5 years with this particular tool, which is about as long as this tool in its form has been in existence. And he runs a wealth management firm out of Austin, Texas. The culture is fantastic. You would love the CEO, just a very larger than life, affable, wonderful person whose employees love him. Their culture scores were soaring. They were doing great. Even during the pandemic, he was able to assuage fears. One of the things that he did during the pandemic was he wanted to grow his organization. So he bought a firm in Waco and bought a firm in Colorado. And all of a sudden, the culture score started to take a dive, a significant dive. And we were watching it over time, and we knew something was wrong. Our tool is a diagnostic tool that doesn't take the place of good conversations. So we reached back out to him and said, something's going on. What's happening? We're seeing your numbers reflect this. Anxiety was as high as we are able to score it. The culture score was low. The well-being of the employees were low. We said, what's going on? So he told us about the 2 acquisitions he had made, and the leaders in those new remote areas were very different from his leadership, very command and control, weren't listening, and it was influencing his main group. They were also bringing in $1.5 million to his bottom line. He said, I can't let go of them. And as we looked at the culture score, I mean, if you want to maintain the core of your employee group in Austin, Texas, you can't afford to keep them. So he made the difficult decision to let them go, and the culture score, their anxiety went to 0, and their culture score went almost as high as we track it. Now, it didn't stay there, but we can see specifically different events that happen within your organization. We can track and map that your culture does change, it does improve. And we define culture as a collection of the behaviors of the people within an organization. If we believe that the collection of behaviors is what makes a culture, the best way for us to predict how people are going to behave is to predict how they're feeling. We ask questions around how people are feeling, so that's a predictive indicator of how they're going to behave. The way that these people in Austin were feeling after the 2 others left was elated, and they were energized, and he credits the culture think tank to saving his organization.
That's great. That's great. Isn't it interesting when you can identify the problem and you identified it as, look, it's these people. And isn't that always the way? You're afraid to get rid of your high producers because it's going to crash the business. And yet you take that toxic person out of your culture and people start to thrive. Well, we had that happen in an organization that Adrian and I led, a training company. And we had a thorn in there, and we were really hesitant to make the change. And as soon as we did, we doubled our business the next year, and that's the power of culture, isn't it? When you get the culture right and the basics right, and you've got the right information, you can make those good decisions as opposed to guessing. Did I get that right?
Completely. And it helps us to be able to know when it happened, why it happened, and we can track it. Helps if you think about some calamities that have happened in, let's say, sports teams, maybe where a coach was allowing some behavior to happen that was damaging to athletes. That's the next piece of our research. We're moving into a sports environment to look at what the athletes need from their coaches, what the parents need, and what the coach needs. So we can adapt this tool to that industry as well. So it helps us to know, are there problems out there? In the Austin example, it was just 2 people with a wildly different leadership style that didn't match the culture of that organization, which drained every employee. We got rid of them and their performance went up. So we're going to be interested to see what happens on sports teams. We can think of Olympic teams. There are plenty of collegiate calamities that we can look at. Had they had information like this on the front side, they could have prevented what happened on the backside.
Okay, so first question is, where do people find out more about the Culture Think Tank? And the second question, as a follow-up, is, so if I'm new to this, how do I get started? So first, where do people go to find more about the Culture Think Tank?
So if you go to theculturethinktank.com, theculturethinktank.com, it gives you information about who we are and what we do. We are a research firm, not a consulting firm. So what we're able to do, given that we're a research firm, we are interested in data points. We have over 1 million data points in our system, and we want there to be more than that. The good news for consumers is because we're a research firm, because we want to capture a lot of data, we don't charge a whole lot for what we do because we're trying to collect data. So go to theculturethinktank.com, and if it's something, if an assessment is what you're interested in, we do what we call a culture snapshot. It's one point in time. You ask the 5 to 7 questions of your employees, and you get this dashboard back that we review with you. And it really helps you look at your organization, the people side of your organization from the inside out. How are people feeling? What are they experiencing right now? And then mainly, what do they need from leadership in order to improve that? We don't ask any questions about how do you like your leader. There's nothing punitive about the tool. It really is very straightforward, saying here's how we're feeling, and here's what we need from leadership. Here's what we need them to start doing and stop doing and continue doing in order for us to do our job better.
You know, it's so great. That actually kind of answers the second question, right? How do you get started? Well, go to the culture workshop, go to the culturethinktank.com and start with an assessment. You know, it's really interesting. There's that famous quote by Peter Drucker that says, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I heard a great variation on that from Gary Ridge. He's the CEO of WD-40, and they've got a phenomenal culture there. And he said, yeah, but when you get the culture right, breakfast, you know, when you get the culture right, breakfast is a feast, right? Strategy and breakfast are a feast. And that's where you want to get to. So again, so I've gone to the culture think tank, and I've started the assessment, and I'm getting some data. What else do you offer? Like, how would I get started, and how do I get Delise on the phone?
Well, I'm going to answer that secondary. I want to primarily answer the issue about Drucker's comment around culture eating strategy for breakfast. I completely agree. If your culture has a strategy, so if your culture has a strategy, then it can eat strategy for breakfast. But your culture is not going to eat strategy for breakfast if you just allow it to happen and not do anything about it. So if you're intentional about it, if you work on it, then I agree. And the way that I help my clients with that is it needs a budget. It needs resources, your culture. It needs some person or persons that are shepherding it. I get frustrated when culture gets relegated to human resources as if it's a human resources initiative. I'm fine if a human resources person is responsible for making sure that we're looking at culture and we're talking about it. But if it gets warehoused in any one department other than a culture department, if you have the opportunity to do that, or a culture committee, or a group of individuals that are working tirelessly in your organization to improve culture. So that's how we define, how do we strategize culture? And that's what we help you do. So if you were to go onto the Culture Think Tank and request a demo, then we get online with you. We show you how the tool works. It's very easy. It's been described to us as the most simple tool they've seen and the most intuitive tool that they've seen in terms of understanding what's going on within my organization. And it's not hard work to do, but it's like anything else. It takes rigor and discipline in order for us to get the culture that we want. But every organization has a culture, some by design and some by default. If we want to have a great culture, it likely won't happen if we don't tend to it. And it can happen if we are intentional about what we're doing with it, where we want it to go. I ask my clients, if you could think about your organization and think about the best culture that is possible within your organization. And we design that and say, okay, let's move toward that. We need a goal, and we need step by step to get us there.
Excellent. I love that. You need rigor and discipline because it's an everyday kind of thing. Well, this has been beyond delightful. This is Delise Simmons. She is the Chief Culture Officer at the Culture Think Tank. Learn more about them at theculturethinktank.com. I'm just so grateful to you because with all the work Adrian and I have done in culture, that measurement piece has always been that little sort of anecdotal, as you said, piece. Now you've got real numbers, you've got real clients that have had real success with real tools, and the most important thing, a roadmap. So from the culture guys, thank you to the Culture Think Tank folks for putting some rigor and discipline around how you create a great culture. So Delise, I'm going to leave the last word to you. If there's one thing you want people to remember or to take away from our conversation, what might that be?
It would be that your culture is not going to be an amazing legacy culture on accident. Your culture will be an amazing legacy culture. And I talk to organizations who have one or two people, the culture of one. Even if you are a one-person shop, you're a one or two-person shop, you can have a legacy culture if you put your intention and design around it. So if you have 1 million employees or two, the same rules apply. So be thinking about what's the culture that I want to have and what are the steps I need to take in order to get there.
Excellent. Thanks again, Delise Simmons, the Chief Culture Officer at the Culture Think Tank. This has been a delight. Hopefully, those of you that are listening and took away 2 or 3 great ideas on how to create the culture that you want where you live and where you work. Thanks so much, Delise. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you, Chester. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you, my friend.
You got that right.